Hi everyone, welcome to A Mighty Blaze Frontliner Fridays. I'm Jenna Paone and we are so thrilled to have the incredible, legendary Lionel Shriver with us here today. This is so much fun. We've been having a great chat already in the green room, and I know we're posting this video a little bit later because we had some Facebook Live tech issues, which blame Mark Zuckerberg for those, not us. But we're so thrilled to hear. I know he can hear me, and we're going to get punished for that. But and Lionel is being interviewed today by our co-founder Jenna Blum. Hello. I'm going to give a little brief intro on Jenna and then let her take it away. In addition to being our fabulous Mighty Blaze co-founder and queen and all-around chief of the world, Jenna Blum is a New York Times best-selling and internationally best-selling author of 3 novels, Those Who Save Us, The Storm Chasers, and The Lost Family. And she is also one of Oprah's top 30 women writers. And obviously, as I said before, the co-founder of The Blaze. So welcome, Jenna. Welcome, Lionel. I'm going to let you two chat, and I'm going to keep myself out of the way for a little bit and enjoy.
Thank you, Jenna. Yes, we have 2 Jennas on The Blaze because one Jenna is never enough. So we have me, and then we have Jenna Paone, who is our on-air host and our producer for the segment. Thank you so much. And a shout out to Tom Shampoo, also, who's running tech behind the scenes. I am so excited today to have Lionel with us. I can call you Lionel, right? Yes. I mean, we're so, thank you. We're so punchy by now. We've been hanging out in the green room for 25 minutes trying to get this interview live online. Again, we're sorry about that, but Facebook was not permitting us.
Well, my dining room is usually complimented that it's been turned into a green room. So.
Yeah, it's beautiful. You have like the tulips behind you, and we should have told you, where's your product placement? But I'll get your product placement in with your new book. I will hold this up many times. I'm going to embarrass you by giving you the introduction that you deserve. Lionel, I need my glasses though, because I can't see without them because I'm old. Lionel Shriver's fiction includes The Mandibles, Property, the National Book Award finalist. So much for that. New York Times bestseller, The Post-Birthday World, which I have here in hardcover because I read books in hardcover, in print, not on a screen. And the international bestseller, we need to talk about Kevin, also in hardcover, which I loved.
Show off.
What's that?
Show off.
I know, right? I'm like, ooh, I got the books. Was also adapted for the 2011 movie, the same name. We need to talk about Kevin with Tilda Swinton and John C. Reilly and Ezra Miller. I wanted to ask you about that also, Lionel. Her journalism has appeared in The Guardian, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, and many other publications. She lives in London and in Brooklyn, New York, although right now in London. Yes, you're joining us from across the pond.
Correct.
All right. Well, welcome. It's such a huge pleasure to talk with you today. I've been a Shriver aficionado since I first read We Need to Talk About Kevin in 2003 when I was like 15. Ha ha ha. And the post.
Still showing off.
Exactly, right? And like Sephora has helped me out with this a little bit. Today, I really want to start us talking about The Motion of the Body Through Space, which is Lionel's new book out May 18th, so hot off the press. I love this. I have so many nosy questions about it. The first one being, I want to ask you to give the dreaded elevator pitch because I think that is always most interesting coming from the authors. So can you give us your thumbnail of what The Motion of the Body Through Space is about?
It's about a couple, she's 60, he's 64. He has recently lost his job in ignominious circumstances and is rather footloose. She has always been something of a fitness fanatic, but in a very private capacity. So she just goes running by herself or goes swimming by herself. It has no social manifestation whatsoever. And her husband has always been something of a layabout. He's one of those peculiar people who is bizarrely attractive, even though he never so much as runs to the post office, right? So, and then so at the very beginning of the book, he announces to his wife that he wants to run a marathon. And first off, his wife points out that this is terribly trite. Everyone runs a marathon these days. And later in the book, he gets sufficiently involved in the endurance sport gestalt that he latches onto the triathlon next. It's almost predictable. And it causes a big rift, partly because the wife has been so vigorous throughout her life that she has completely destroyed her knees and can't do nearly the kind of exercise that she used to. And the whole idea of the book is to examine the cult of fitness and to look at how we've become so bizarrely obsessed with physical activity and how competitive we've become about it. And it used to be we were competitive about money or career success, right? And more recently, who's thinner. But now it's about who gets more exercise. And we don't talk about it as a phenomenon very much. We talk about it, we're caught up in the obsession. And so we talk about, well, I'm really into cardio, or I'm really into interval training, but we don't talk about the fact we never used to talk about interval training or cardio. I mean, this is what happened.
Right. I mean, I'm sitting here looking at my Fitbit and it's giving me little buzzes to say, get moving. You haven't moved your ass for, 15 minutes. So you need to get up and walk around your apartment. And one of the characters.
Well,
sorry.
I'm just going to say, I'm surprised you're not doing this interview on a standing desk that has a treadmill.
I might be. I'm just very good at keeping my upper body stationary. But I was thinking one of the characters in the book, Tommy, who works with this couple, has a Fitbit that she's governed by, and she has to take 30,000 steps a day. And I think one of the marks of a really good book for me is when you sort of fold it into your everyday life and you remember things that you've read and you think, who said that? Oh my gosh, it wasn't a person I know, it was somebody in the book. And I was thinking about Tommy yesterday when I found myself pacing at the very end of the day, trying to make my 10,000 steps up, like in my apartment, shuttling back and forth in front of my bay windows, looking like a maniac. And I thought, how could this, fictional character walk 30,000 freaking steps a day? So I have many questions about the book, which I absolutely love. And one of them is people are going to think that you're the main character, even if you're not the main character. It's one of the joys of being a novelist. So I have to ask, are you also an exercise? You use the word fanatic, so I will take that cue from you. Are you an avid exerciser?
Yes, I am. And therefore, this book is a little closer to me personally than some of my other work, because it's also, it's not just looking critically at other people, it's also an act of self-criticism.
Interesting. That's so interesting. How was that? Was it a sort of a relief to do the self-criticism, or was it difficult?
It interested me. The challenge of the book to begin with was to get over a worry that it interested me and maybe it didn't interest anyone else. But as I got into the book, my concern that maybe this is a slightly trivial matter for me to be writing a whole book about pretty much disappeared, because it does touch on a lot of bigger issues, not least of all aging and mortality. We seem to use exercise as a vehicle to express our anxieties about a whole host of things, including our vulnerability to illness. We have embraced a mystique that as long as we get those 30,000 steps, we can't get cancer. And also we're not going to get old, and we won't be fat, and we'll be beautiful. I mean, with the amount, not much less are we ever going to die. And that's a huge amount of stuff to be loading on, running around in circles.
That's true. Yeah, it's such a fallacy. I think we put so much time and energy into our bodies and our appearance and our health. I have a friend who wrote to me recently that he thinks the greatest joke of all is on people in general, because we spend an inordinate amount of time in our days tending to our machines, and within 24 hours after we die, the whole thing just sort of goes kerflooey, right? So in some ways it seems like the biggest waste of time, and in other ways it's such an intimate engagement that we have every day with our bodies. I loved Serenata in the book. She's the heroine, and I want to ask you about the names because I love the names. But I was so struck by her plight, not only of having her husband suddenly announce that he was going to run a marathon and start training, and in the obnoxious way of men everywhere, forgive me, gentlemen, but you decide you're going to go on a diet and you drop 10 pounds, or you decide you're going to run a marathon, you run a marathon. The rest of the human race is like, we're working really hard here. But she not only has to watch her husband embark on this thing and do it successfully, at least initially, she can't run, and she's a runner, and her knees have given out. So for me, the book, the first third of it especially, is a meditation on aging and the indignities of aging, which, I confront on a daily basis every day after I turned 40. I was like, wait, my eyes are not working today. I need my glasses, not for decoration, but because I actually can't see. Can you talk a little bit about your sort of interaction with that subject in the motion of the book?
Well, since we seem to be in a time that we put an inordinate amount of emphasis on our appearance, when your body starts to fail you, it feels like a character failing. You mentioned your failing eyesight. Of course, I'm wearing readers also, or I couldn't see your face. It would be just me. Right? And I remember when it first started to happen in my 40s, which is when it happens to everybody, like big surprise. But of course, I thought I was an exception to everything. We all do.
Yes.
And I was in denial. My husband finally had to point out I was in bed with a book, reading with one eye. Right? That's a bad sign. But I refused to believe that my vision was decaying. And I took it personally. I took menopause personally. It felt like, I was failing myself as a female. It feels like your fault. And there's something about what's going on socially that reinforces this impression. There's a line in the book, I won't be able to quote directly, but Serenata says of her husband that she's going to be, it's her job to be the only person on earth who doesn't look at her husband's thinning hair and assume that he doesn't matter, and what he thinks is irrelevant, and that there's something wrong with him, that he's a big discard. And I think aging is one of the hardest things we have to do. It's also a very modern thing to have to do, because we didn't used to get old. We just died. Right? At 30. And there weren't any old people.
Right.
Up until about the middle of the 1800s, the average life expectancy was 40. Right? So you didn't have to worry about never mind about your vision. Your vision was never going to decay.
Right.
You just weren't going to be here anymore.
In the grave, it would decay, right? I am so glad you mentioned, I underline my books, and hopefully that's not, a defacing of your book, but this is how I engage with books. I dog ear, underline, like the line.
Oh, I do the same thing. Yeah.
So much. And what the line that you just mentioned about Remington, the husband, was one of the things that I underlined my readers on to demonstrate the point, but that it was her job to look upon her husband with kindness, to screw up her eyes and blur the eruptions of uninvited skin conditions into a smooth surface, to be the sole person in the entire world who did not regard the slight thickening under his jaw as a character flaw. And she says also that her husband would not regard her physical decay as a sign that she had done something wrong, perhaps even morally wrong, and he would not hold her accountable for being a disappointment. And I loved that. It reminded me so much of not only my own feelings about getting older, but there's a line in a book called Starting Out in the Evening by Brian Morton about this very, very old writer who gets involved with a very, very young interviewer physically and romantically. And before their first love scene, he thinks of his aging, his very aged body, as a moral failing, and feels ashamed of it, as if it were something that he had done wrong. And I'm so struck by this concept in our culture of aging as something that you have done wrong, or that you need to be embarrassed about, when in fact, it's actually a privilege to age. It's not an infirmity, it's a privilege.
Of course, it doesn't feel that way.
No, it doesn't. So I love that you are talking about aging in the book, and I have many thoughts and feels about it. I was thinking about what you said about taking menopause personally, and this sort of feeling of shame that is attached to the body and getting older. And is this, I think of this as like a really cultural thing, probably appended to not only living past the natural human, age cycle, which was supposed to be about 40. And if you had kids, it was more like 20 in the olden days, but also our cultural appreciation of youth. And you obviously don't think this is changing or going anywhere.
No, it seems to be getting worse. Because we seem to be more and more focused on image. I don't know whether it's the internet. We blame it for everything. Why not blame it for that too? This whole thing of cultivating a vision of yourself on social media, which is different. It's beside yourself. It's something that you create. And I think that we're coming to the point where we believe that our bodies are creations. They are works of art. And so that we impute to them this sense of imagination and shaping and sculpting. Although I think that for most of us, our bodies are pretty much a given. They're not really that malleable. And I am disturbed by the fact that now that we're so focused on image, that we seem to be increasingly locating the self in the body. And I think that's a terrible mistake. Anybody who's ever been in a bad auto accident can tell you what a big mistake that is. But the biggest point at which you start, if you're smart, separating a little bit your sense of yourself and the thing that you walk around in, is getting older. Because until you get demented anyway, the self is continuing to evolve, often getting fuller and richer, more interested, better informed. And yet you're watching this little house start to fall apart. And if you locate your sense of self too much in the body, then the sensation is that you yourself are corrupting, which is a horrible experience. And it's hard enough to be in an organism which is very slowly dying on you. You start dying at some midpoint in your life. Everything is just going to hell, and it's obviously, first of all, it's foreshadowing the ultimate. So it's a bad reminder of that. But the answer is to somehow split off a little bit, put a little space between you and that organism. And I find I'm very happy to do that on behalf of other people. I don't judge my friends according to whether or not they're starting to show their age. I still relish their company. But somehow in relation to self, that's much harder to do, which is a little weird.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess, maybe it's an ego thing. Nobody wants to think that she won't be here anymore at some point. Mm-hmm. So all of these sort of erosive reminders that is going to be the case no matter how much we try to stave it off. I think maybe that's what it speaks to. Like you, I don't look at my friends and think, oh my God, you're so pathetic because your waist is thickening or you're getting crow's feet or whatever. But in myself, I think, oh, what fresh hell is this now? Like right. There's a line one day where there wasn't a line before. It's such a surprising thing. And it occurred to me, like going through the joys of perimenopause earlier this year, which I will now confess to the world, but it's such a peculiarity. It's like having the flu all the time for like a few months at least. And I was
It
feeling.
just gets worse, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I have like some, some hotlines into like people who might give me like bioidenticals or something, or, like I'm like, I have PMS for 4 months, but I felt sort of dreadfully ashamed of it until one day I thought, every woman in the world goes through this. There's no escaping it. You can't pay it away. You can't pay to get rid of it. It doesn't matter what plastic surgeon you have or how much makeup you use. If you live to a certain age, you will inevitably go through this. And it made the pill a little easier to swallow, although not much, I have to say. So I think it's such a fresh and universal topic and a brave topic to be confronting in this book. And there are a lot of brave topics in the book. I love what you said earlier about you were worried that maybe the book was only of consuming interest to you, and I think every writer has that. I certainly feel that something I'm passionate about is not going to translate to anybody beyond my own head. But not only are the concerns about aging universal and this sort of slow decay or sometimes rapid decay of the body, one of the things I love about the novel is its sort of meditations on the landscape of marriage and how a marriage shifts so tenuously and tectonically. One of the partners suddenly decides to make a rapid change. It's like my agent, who is French, tells about a friend of hers, and she says, my friend's husband, and she married him. She thought she was marrying a lawyer, and he wake up one day and decide he wants to be a rabbi. And so now she has to be the wife of a rabbi. Like, that is not the life she signed on for. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your considerations of Remington and Serenata's marriage and the erosion it also undergoes when he decides he's going to suddenly start running.
Well, part of the problem is one of territory, because I think there's a way in which a husband and wife divide up the world between them. And you have different areas of expertise. And, my husband's a jazz drummer, never shuts up about jazz. What if I decided I wanted to become a drummer? Oh my God.
Look at that.
It would be a catastrophe, right? And that's basically what happens in this marriage, that fitness has been her little thing. It may be very private, but that also makes it hurts. So there's a way they have this kind of ridiculous conversation in which he presses her. Well, what you own fitness? Did you actually invent the push-up? Right? There's a word for push-up. So you're so proud of doing them, but someone else came up with it. So it's obviously not your creation. But she does have a very possessive feeling about the entire arena, that whole arena of life. It belongs to her, not to him. And therefore he's upsetting a kind of, the kind of peace that you get between two countries that border each other, right? And there's no contest about which land belongs to which country. And when someone tries to move the border, they get into a war. And that's exactly what happens in marriage.
I love that. It's so beautifully put. One would think almost think you were like one of the world's best writers.
A fucking writer.
Yeah. Oh, that could be it. Right. So I have to ask again, readers will think, oh, this is clearly you. You're clearly Serenata, even if you're not. I mean, the joke is if you write a memoir, people think that
Serenata is taller than I am.
Okay, well, in that case, it's clearly not you. Have you seen this kind of shift happen in marriages? Your husband is a jazz drummer. Have you ever picked up a drumstick or, decided that you wanted to play jazz, or the marriages around you? Have you seen that kind of shift, and do they survive?
Funnily enough, I got an email from a friend of mine who had just read the new book, and she said, actually, all the women she knew who were married to men who got into triathlons are now divorced. Mm-hmm. And it makes perfect sense to me, because it's not just that, it's not just some new thing. This is very specific. It's incredibly absorbing, and it kind of there's a whole culture around it. so that it promotes this idea that you're involved in a noble pursuit, that it's spiritually uplifting, that it's not just about the body, but it's also about the refinement of the will, the mind, mind over body, forcing yourself to extend your limits and realize that you actually have no limits. It's quite grandiose, right? It also takes a lot of time. And if you get involved in doing these events, it even takes a lot of money, because you have to go to them and you have to pay entry fees and you have to do all this training. And it makes people incredibly narcissistic, right? It's an act of total self-absorption. Now, I wouldn't diss anybody who gets into it just because to each his own, it's a big world, right? But if my husband got into it, I would be a little worried, because the vanity of it is oppressive. And what becomes obnoxious about it is that it doesn't package itself as vain. It even has an element of pseudo altruism, or people who run these marathons, they expect enormous admiration. And well, I have appreciation for how difficult it is to push yourself beyond a certain point physically, but it's not heroic, right? It's not doing anything for anybody else. It's still essentially a warped form of entertainment.
That's true. Unless you could argue, if you were fundraising, or if you were running for a cause, it would be at least a nod in that direction. But
the truth is, this whole thing of running for a cause is a little band-aid of virtue over what is a very self-absorbed pursuit. None of these people would be out just going door to door trying to raise money for Save the Children. That's not what they want to do. And then there are a lot of advantages to running for charity, because it often waives the entrance fee. It often gets you into the race at all, because a lot of these races are very difficult to get into. So that it's I don't think it's usually driven by a desire to do good. It's more of that kind of fake packaging.
Yeah, I love that all of the sections of the book that deal with this is sort of like pulling back the Band-Aid to expose the wounds of people's vanity and the things that they're striving to do despite the limitations of their bodies. And in terms of, pushing the body and subjugating the will to achieve this goal of like ultimate triathlete fitness is moot, given what we were talking about earlier, which is age. So it's a fool's errand in some sense, or in a really large sense. And in terms of the marriage, I'm struck by the fact that whenever you have somebody in a marriage suddenly pick up a new obsession that is very consuming and that burgeons to fill the time of the marriage, mm-hmm. and pushes aside, elbows aside things that otherwise used to be in the relationship, it's almost as though the person has taken a mistress. Like there's a third person in that relationship. It's just that the person happens to be the obsession, whether it's, a new religion, or it's, you hear this with addicts who are in recovery too. Recovery becomes the new religion and elbows out what used to be the third person, which was the addiction. And I almost feel that way about Remington, that his brand new addiction to running and to becoming a triathlete fills so much space that it pushes Serenata out. And she's very aware of this. He also has a trainer whose name I love. It's Bambi, of course it is. So in a sense, he did, everybody watching Bambi, I'm sorry, sorry. We know your name is really lovely and you couldn't help it. But he has, in essence, a mistress who is sort of like his runner wife or his triathlete wife, in the same way that people have like work husbands or work wives. Can you talk about that love triangle a little bit between Remington, Bambi, and Serenata?
Well, I mean, that's well observed that the obsession itself becomes a kind of third party in the marriage. And in the book, of course, I have personified the third party in this really sexy, basically perfect woman. She's, we're never sure quite how old. She's probably late 30s. but she's described as looking like a walking anatomy book illustration, right? You know the type, and there are more of them walking around than there used to be. Every single muscle defined, everything rippling, and she's everything that Serenata isn't anymore, and never was quite, because Serenata was not a complete fanatic. So this woman is a personal trainer. She finds Remington as a new client. She latches onto him because she helps get him through the marathon he runs. And oh, by the way, she's on her second lap.
Right. It's a lap. I love that. As if it, that second 26 point whatever. Obviously, I'm not a marathon runner. 26.2 miles. It's just like a breeze,
Yeah, it's obnoxious. And she's meant to be obnoxious, and is meant to, she makes Serenata feel incredibly insecure, replaced, and also puts any athletic accomplishments that the wife has notched up in the shade. I mean, it's just like everything she's done, it looks pathetic. And useful for the book because it creates a triangle. Serenata is never quite sure how much she wants to be involved in this tri club that keeps coming over, and they drink all their wine and eat up all the food. And actually, the Tri Club is not full of horrible people. I take the Mickey out of them a little bit, but they're meant to be just regular people who want a purpose in life and have found something that excites them and makes them feel important and gives them a goal. So they're not terrible people, and they're not all stupid or something. But their company is oppressive because that's all they care about, and it's all they talk about. And this stuff is really, really boring to listen to.
Yeah, I think about the Emerson quote, "Every hero is a bore at last." And I think that about zealots of any stripe. It doesn't matter what the actual subject is. If you are that extreme and the people around you are not interested, it's just, you're really, really tedious. So I love how that was described in the novel. Now, I have to ask about names also, because I struggle with naming my characters. I have my, World Book of Baby Names, and various like weird ways that I have to name my characters. If I don't get a character's name right, then I know that character is not really a person yet. The names are so fantastic in this book. So you have Remington, and then you have Serenata, which is so beautiful. And their last name is Alabaster. And then there's Tommy, the woman who works for them. And then, of course, the Bambi.
Bambi Buffer.
Bambi Buffer.
It's her work handle. It's
like a stripper name or something. What is the thing, Jenna P, about the stripper name is the first street you lived on, and then your middle name or the name of your first pet. And all my names are awful. They're like Vivo Park. Like, this is not a good stripper name. But Bambi Buffer obviously is like an excellent stripper name. How do you come up with these names? They're fantastic.
I too sometimes scour baby names on the web, so I'm not as different from you as all that. And I'm looking for a sound or a feel. It's very instinctive. It's a lot like titles. I know that I sometimes go for more Baroque name choices. And the two main characters, Remington Alabaster and Serenata Terpsichore.
Right.
I think that's such a cool name.
It is.
I know they're kind of outsized. And when I do that, then I also try to balance it out a little bit by choosing some pretty ordinary names for the other characters. So all the other characters, you'll find their names are within a certain range. They're not that weird, and it helps keep it toned down a little bit, because if everybody had these outlandish names, it would feel kind of like a big carnival. You don't want that. But I do like being a little daring with my names. I don't do it every time. The book I just finished the first draft of, I very deliberately made all the names very ordinary. It was an experiment, and it felt right for the project. So it's partly the nature of the book, but I do consider it very important, as you do. I become very attached to the names. And for example, my editor did suggest, she said, you know, these names, there are going to be some American readers who really don't like this. And I thought about it for a microsecond. But by then I had written the book and edited the book, and no, you know, that's their names. So I actually could not bring myself to change them. In spite of the fact that, you know, with find and replace, it's pretty easy to change character names throughout an entire manuscript. But it's not possible for me to do it in my soul.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I think in some sense, the more Baroque names, the bigger, larger than life names help differentiate the main actors from the best supporting players and players, and it makes them stand out more against the landscape of the book and says, pay attention to these people. And there's a sort of I felt like a nudge wink from the writer to the reader to say, like, I know these names are like these big names, but you know, these are big people. These are the characters to pay attention to. And I thought they were terrific. And I think they're sort of brave too, in that way. My worst, I'll share name anecdote with you. The worst writer anecdote I have about a name is that I was writing a second novel about a woman whose name was Katrina. And the book is called The Storm Chasers, and I was writing it during the Hurricane Katrina. And so my agent again said to me, like, Jenna, before we go to auction with this, you have to change her name. I'm sorry. And I said, but that's her name. I've been writing this for 2 years. You wouldn't suddenly change your child's name just because a hurricane was named the same thing as your child. Like, this is a real person to me. And she said, Jenna, you absolutely cannot have a heroine in a weather-related book named Katrina. It is tacky. So I did change it, but I changed it to Karina, like, ooh, big whoop. So, and I still think of her as Katrina, and sometimes misspeak it. So I think in terms of brave choices, I'm struck by the language in your novels too, not just in the motion of the body through space, but in Kevin and also in the post-birthday world and your other books as well. There's just sort of a Nabokovian enjoyment, I think, of language in your books. Like, there's obviously a very careful attention to language in a very Orwellian sense, also about how our word choices make us smarter or stupider, I think, and it's sort of like groupthink language or new vernacular that everybody just uses, I would say blindly, but it's more like deafly. You know, we just sort of pick it up and parrot it. Makes us dumber. And so I wanted to ask, for you, like, the clear and linguistic enjoyment, does that mean when you start a book, do you start it with the language first? Like, do you work from the top down, from language to character and plot, or do you start with the building blocks of character and plot first and then pay attention to the language? Or is it sort of all braided in?
More or less braided in. I plan out my books to a degree in advance, and the one thing I don't plan is the language. So that's what is created in process. And I fancy that different books have slightly different voices. I may be deluded on that point. Maybe all my novels sound the same because I wrote them and I'm stuck with the voice I've got. So that's actually the kind of judgment that other people are supposed to make, and it's not something I think I should be worrying about. I like to think that I have become a little simpler in terms of my prose style over the years. You know, that old creative writing advice is to always choose the simplest word that means what you want it to, rather than going for the big one. I continue to be told, even with my latter books, that I had to read it with a dictionary, or, you know, I learned so many new vocabulary words. And I find this a little befuddling because honestly, I think that most of the words I use are pretty ordinary, kind of in that narrow range as the minor characters' names. And I have a funny feeling that I grew up with a vocabulary, and this is to my parents' credit, not mine, that is just a little bit broader than has become commonplace. So when I hear readers say, oh, I learned all these new words, I think, oh, that's a pity. Because I am not trying to show off. In fact, quite in my latter incarnation, absolutely the opposite. And I am impatient with writers who are thesaurus heads and deliberately use a huge amount of arcane vocabulary that nobody's going to know and most people aren't going to look up. Almost nobody ever looks anything up. In fact, most of those people who talk about reading it with my books with a dictionary are lying. They didn't look up a single word. So I'm not big on that overly thick texture to prose. It is fun once in a while to kind of showcase an interesting word, but preferably within a paragraph that doesn't have 5 of them, just like one word that and preferably a word that there is no synonym for, right? That there's only one word that means this.
We used to get scolded in grad school for using the $20 word. And I, like you, I'm sort of predilected toward the $20 word because I read a lot as a child and soaked all the vocabulary in. And one of my favorite teaching evaluations was Professor Blum is very big-headed and she uses a lot of big words. And I thought, good. So, I think you're a nicer person than I am, because my reaction to people writing to me to say I had to use the dictionary to look up this word was, good, you learned something. Right. And so I don't get the impression ever with your books that you're using the vocabulary to show off. I get the impression that instead of using the word that is the simplest word, writers should strive to use the right word. And sometimes the multisyllabic word is the right word, and the $20
yeah,
word.
absolutely. And also, I mean, I hate word repetition. And it's funny, I had a review a couple of books ago, was over here, who could not stand the fact that I didn't like word repetition, which I thought was so weird. He couldn't stand the fact there were too many synonyms.
Reviewers are really a strange breed. I had one reviewer who was really angry with me with my last book because I put in too many town names, and apparently they thought that the book should have taken place in some rando universe where nothing was named specifically. They said, did Blum have MapQuest to do this? And I thought, wrong decade, Bubba. And now I just alienated that reviewer even more, but that's fine. I love this discussion. I'm aware I'm keeping you forever, and I have like a jillion more questions to ask you. One of them comes from our co-founder, Caroline Levitt, so I'm going to read this on my phone. It is the era. I would very much like to ask Lionel, I should be reading this in a very sweet Caroline voice because she's awesome. I would very much like to ask Lionel about her first book, The Female of the Species, which I still have and still adore. But the thing that got me was in her acknowledgments. She thanked her editor for staying warm and dry amidst the torrents of her hysteria. Since Miss Shriver always seems in absolute command of her genius, I'd love to know more of the story of this incredibly good book. And hi, Lionel.
Gosh, I have talked to so few people who've read my first novel. That's funny.
That's sort of
and I haven't read it in decades. But I do remember it. I remember having a really good time writing it. It wasn't the first book that I'd ever written. It was my second that I'd actually written. And since there is a God, the first one didn't see print. I loved, there are a couple of inset scenes, big departures, right? That I probably wouldn't allow myself today. There's one off in Africa that lasts, I don't know, it's a little about that much of the book. And there's a whole huge backstory in North Adams, Massachusetts. And structurally, that's really dubious. but I was young. I didn't think I was, which is almost the definition of being young.
So you're like 27, right? And you're like, I know everything.
And I was just, I was experimenting, and I was having a wonderful time with the, fiction is pretty amazing. It's something from nothing. And so just being able to create all these people was a riot. What is especially amusing to me now as I look back on my main character, who was a woman of 59, and to me, when I was writing that book, that she was old.
Around, yeah.
And it's for those of you who haven't read the book, it's a May-December relationship between this older woman and a grad student, very attractive grad student, and it's all seen from the perspective of the her middle-aged assistant, who has been in love with her forever, and she is a famous anthropologist, and so that the grad student might have reasons to hook up with her that are not very romantic, but merely practical. So the question is, how real is this? And I have to say, looking back, even with those departures I've described, it's well structured. That's a good triangular structure. And I have a feeling I wouldn't like, if I went back to it, I wouldn't like the prose as much because of what we were just talking about. That I think I tended to be a little more flowery, whereas I'm more dry now, and a little flatter, a little quieter. Nevertheless, every once in a while I do talk to somebody who's read that book and really liked it, and that's kind of a hoot. It's nice. It's weird for me. One of the weird things about being a writer is that book still exists. In some ways, the person who wrote it doesn't quite, but the book is still out there.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Excuse me. I think so many things I could ask you about what you just said. One of them is the sort of change over time from your earliest calling card until your most recent book. It sounds like you've been shifting your ideas about prose. Like from the outside, I see there's a distinctive, Lionel Shriver voice. If I could, pick up any of your books, I would know that it was yours, even if it didn't have the name on the cover, because of the rhythm of the language. But I think that's an interesting thing. It sounds like you're a structuralist also, which I love. And Jenna is in my novel workshop, and I harp on this all the time, that novels should have symmetrical structures and that people should outline. And do you write from an outline typically?
Yeah, I mean, you can call it whatever you want. I've got a bunch of notes, and and I have a sort of vague plan in my head. The most depressing thing about having a plan is that you think that you've done the hard part.
Yeah.
So, you have all these designs, but until they are manifested, they are nothing. And you can have the greatest structure in the world, but unless you can deliver line by line, then it doesn't matter. So, and actually in the execution of writing a book, that's something that I find it's useful to not think about. Right? Because that's what's going to make or break the book. Those sentences that you're writing, just coming up with one after the other. And it's best that process remain underimportant in your mind. All right? Which is a way of giving you freedom. Because you tell yourself, well, I'm just experimenting, and anything that I don't like, I can change.
Less pressure on
Right.
the on the map, basically on the blueprint or on the recipe, or how many other freaking metaphors can I throw at this? Do you feel like, because I have in my study, I have right now 3 novels outlined on a wall. You know, I have like 3 different bulletin boards, 3 different novel outlines. And as soon as I finish the outline, my agent will tell you this, I have no interest really in writing the novel. It's not really the way I find the key in. It's good to know that the shape of them is there, but what I'm really looking for is when I sit down to write the sentences, I have to plug into some emotional intensity or some sort of magic, and the people have to feel real to me, and they have to feel weird. Like they have to feel weird enough to be real people. Is that the kind of thing that you look for, or do you think, okay, I'm getting into a rhythm with the sentences now, and I think that this is sort of spinning itself like Rumpelstiltskin?
Oh no, I mean, I just plunge right in, and I think aside from having some sense of where you're going and what the shape of the project is and vaguely what it's for, it's better not to be self-conscious about the process at all, and just generate the work. And I think thinking is your enemy.
Yeah.
Right.
After a certain point, yeah, I think it is. Do you ever, excuse me, do you ever come up with a project that just feels like really leaden and you set it aside, or do you always power through and write these fantastic books?
I think I started one project that I didn't end up finishing, but it wasn't a book, it was a novella. Otherwise, I have never started a book without finishing it. I have had ideas for books that I didn't execute, but maybe they're not good ideas, right? Or I came up with a better one. So,
we're coming up even on an hour of conversation, which means that with the time that we kept you in the green room, it's probably been actually like 14 hours. So I have like one last question for you, because I know that your readers want to talk about, we need to talk about Kevin, which is one of your most visible books and was made into a movie. I loved this book. I love this because it's about a mom who has a child who's a potentially violent child, a potentially dangerous son, who she loves dearly, but admits that she does not understand or often like. So, I mean, I could do a whole interview with you just on, we need to talk about Kevin. The question I most want to ask now is, have you become a sort of lightning rod, especially in the climate that we live in, of increased gun violence and increased violence against children, for disturbed teens? Like, do people write to you because they have children that they're frightened of or that they're frightened for? Do you get pushback from readers about this book? It's such a high profile book and so well regarded.
Well, that book came out in 2003, so I don't hear from readers that much about that book anymore. But at the time, I was sometimes contacted by often parents that had disturbed kids. You know, I have a Kevin. It was a certain kind of fan letter I get. I have a Kevin, or someone would confide that at one of my events. It was chilling, in fact. Apparently, the phenomenon is not as rare as I would like to think. And you know, even more often though, I heard from parents who said, parents or non-parents, who said, you know, we've been going through agonies trying to decide whether to have a kid, and your novel was very useful to us in our discussions. You know, we both read it, and it helped us talk out some of our anxieties about what would happen, or what we're worried about with going ahead and taking the plunge and having a kid. And I'm glad that the book has functioned in a therapeutic sense. Otherwise, of course, it's just supposed to be a good story.
It is a good, I mean, it's a wonderful story. It's such a brave story, because I think a lot of the tropes about motherhood in fiction are that you're supposed to be endlessly self-sacrificial, and you're supposed to love and like your children no matter what. And Kevin is really disturbed and torments his younger sibling. And it's such a brave book, and you have a reputation for bravery in your subjects and your language, and that's certainly the case with Kevin. And so do you respond to, I'm totally lying to you about the one more question thing. I have two more questions actually.
All right.
Do you always respond to your reader email or your fan letters?
Yeah, I do. I'm not always good about doing it right away, but I do. I'm always touched when people go to the trouble of writing to authors and expressing their appreciation. Now, occasionally I get a different kind of letter, and it's not expressing appreciation, and no, I do not respond to those.
You're, again, a nicer person than I am, because I have to sit on my hand not to respond to those letters or certain reviews on Amazon, but I try to respond to them only in the shower with, invective. And I can't let you go without asking about the movie. We need to talk about Kevin. How did you like the way it turned out?
Yeah, I mean, on balance, I did. I think it's a good piece of work. I would have liked to see it a little more accessible. That is, really just being a little clearer on what's happening. Because there's no reason to be confusing about the book. Is not confusing. The book is very easy to understand. So I might have preferred that to be a little clearer, and therefore a little less arty and open to a larger, more general audience. But it's not that arty, and the casting is terrific. I think Tilda Swinton is great. Ezra Miller is great as the older Kevin. The casting was also great in terms of the younger two Kevins, which you can see the continuity. It seems as if it's the same person. That's really hard to do. And it was kind of thrilling to have a book actually become adapted to the screen. I've sold so many options, and this is, part of the course. I stopped taking them seriously. I still don't take them seriously even after the movie was made of Kevin, because the odds are so poor. So that was kind of a kick. And the most gratifying part of that experience was when the director, who also wrote the script, used the dialogue from the book word for word, and then had these great actors using my dialogue. And that was thrilling, because they were the best scenes in the movie, because it really had to do with a coming together of talents, right? So the actors and the director brought these scenes to life in a way that even fiction, good fiction on the page, doesn't quite manage. It was like magic. So yeah, that was really fun.
That's very cool. This is like the famous, we need to talk about Kevin. And again, I'm going to hold up. I'm going to do like the Lionel Shriver fan club moment. I wish I had many more hands, because I also have post-birthday world hair, and I could do, be like Medusa and have all the hands. But what would you like to tell readers about the motion of the body through space? Like, what is the sort of a takeaway, or anything you want to say to your readers before we release you into your evening, before it gets dark?
I'm hopeful that it reads pretty fast. It's one of my shorter novels. It has tons of dialogue in it, and partly because that's what I like to read in novels. I really like it when conversations just rip. I didn't even bother to use a lot of, those little bits of theater. She put down a glass. I kind of skipped all that this time, and it's funny. It's I think it's one of my lighter books, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't mean it's a trivial book, but it's meant to be entertaining. I never try to write books that you think you should read, right? I never aim to be that thing on the coffee table that makes you feel guilty. It's supposed to be fun.
That's great. Well, this is a super fun book. It's a very entertaining read about very serious things, which I think is the best of both worlds. Lionel, thank you so much for spending your time with us this evening and for being patient with the tech issues. I know that your readers and your fans who are multitudinous, they're so excited to hear from you about your new book and about all your books and writing. And this has just been a really grand conversation. So thank you very, very, very much.
I really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for saying.
Ditto. Thank you.